My name is Becky Posey Williams. I am the Senior Director for Sexual Ethics and Advocacy at the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. So my family has never known what I do, and now they really don't know what I do with all of those words. My brother will text me and say, "Tell me again, somebody's asking me what you're doing." So, but we are thrilled to be here, but we're more thrilled that you are here. You are the game changers out in the field doing this work and doing work that we have to do. We've both been doing response team work for quite a number of years, and the one thing I want you to hear from me today is we want your questions. If you've had experiences with this work and you want to share anything with this group, there is wisdom in this room multiplied by the number of people in this room. So do not hesitate to share any of your experiences with us. We can all learn from that and grow from that. So I'm going to let Donna introduce herself, and she's going to lead us in a prayer as we get started.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am Donna Thompson. I serve in the North Carolina Conference. I am pastor at Avent Ferry United Methodist Church in Raleigh, very close to NC State, Wolfpack. Also, I have served on the North Carolina Conference Sexual Ethics team for 8 years, and 4 of those 8 years I have been chair. I also developed and trained the response team and offer training every year for new licensees who are coming in on sexual ethics. And I am just honored and humbled to be here serving as with Becky in leading and also continuing to learn. So I look forward to our time together in sharing and learning. And I'd like to open us up with a brief prayer. Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for all who have gathered here, for the sacrifice of time. We thank you for the various experiences in this room, and we pray that as we go forward in learning more about responding to complaints, we pray that the future will be more receptive to those who are making complaints, that they will be believed, that they will be supported, and we pray, Lord, that respondents will also be repentant and that there will be less and less complaints coming forth as we learn more about responding in fruitful ways. We give you thanks and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay. I know some of you, and I know we have a variety of people in here. We have bishops, we have university theologians, we have pastors, we have DSs, we have DCMs, we have, what else do I see? What am I missing? Deacons. Thank you. Thank you. Lay members. Board of Ordained Ministry members. Yeah. What? AME? And somebody else. Counselors. Great. That's what I am. We are typically the minority in the group, so yeah. I'm glad you're all here. Thank you for being here. Again, this is work we have to do. We don't have a choice. We have to do this work. Donna, you want to just speak to this slide?
Sexual ethics has been something that we have pretty much been in denial about because we just don't want to believe that a clergy leader could actually perform acts of sexual misconduct in any form. So the first thing that we need to do is come to the realization that these types of behaviors do actually occur, and they do actually occur amongst clergy leaders. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And one of the main things we need to focus on is helping these people be accountable. It's because we have not been focusing in that area that these situations, these behaviors continue.
We are going to tag team this today, so I hope that will not be too disruptive as we move through this PowerPoint. So this 101 session is designed to help you begin to think about who should be on these response teams? How do you go about recruiting these response teams? And then what do you do in the way of training once you receive the group of people who have made a commitment to be a part of this ministry? Can I just have a show of hands real quickly? Any of you in here currently using a response team? Okay. 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 You have one. It's not always used in response to a complaint. Okay. Okay. So please, 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 once again, feel free to share with us your experiences as we learn today. So this is to get us started thinking about, okay, who do we begin to think about when we talk about pulling together a response team? Again, what I hear over and over again is that it varies from annual conference to annual conference. Some annual conferences have nice budgets set aside for their response team. Some annual conferences have zero budgets set aside for their response team. And the majority of the people on it, whether it's lay, clergy, whomever, offer this as a volunteer service in ministry. So that's a basic question to assess is do we have a budget in our annual conference for this? And do you need it? What are your thoughts? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, Bonnie?
I would say you need a budget even if the budget doesn't include anything more than the expenses of the people responding.
Right. Whether that's mileage, a meal, something of that nature. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes?
Our conference also pays for counseling for any victims for as long as they need it.
So the annual conference offers restitution in the form of payment for counseling for victims if they need it. And that comes out of that budget, is what I'm understanding you to say. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? As with any program, you don't want the money to drive the service, and at the same time, this costs some money. Even as Bonnie said, even if it is simply that people have to get from one place to another, and how do they do that? Do they take their own car? Do they drive 5 hours? Do you have teams set up geographically in your annual conference so that if something happens in the southern part of your annual conference or the northern part of your annual conference, you have key people in that area to pull upon? So as we move forward, I throw out to you and offer to you these ideas of some groups that you might consider beginning to think about. I also encourage you, because you know who your people are, I encourage you as you go through the next 2 hours here to begin thinking, as you're hearing this material, begin thinking, who do I know that has an appreciation for what this is all about? Because I think that is a key piece in this. So professionals who are trained in issues around professional misconduct, such as therapists, counselors, EAP providers, people of that nature. People trained in grief work, again, such as counselors, Stephen's ministry. I've always been so impressed with the people in my experience with Stephen's ministry. And they take training very seriously, again, from my experience in the services and ministry that they offer. Spiritual directors, some of your annual conferences may even have training programs in spiritual direction. That is a wealth of wisdom and experience to draw upon. Pastors, people trained in critical incident stress debriefing, and again, depending on where you're located, I understand that the resources will vary in that. But again, just a jumping off place, if you will, today for suggestions. Yes?
In Virginia, while we're not as geographically dispersed as folks in the West or New England, geographical distribution is also an element for us, as well as what is obviously both ethnic and linguistic diversity.
Right, right. Did everyone hear that? The diversity that exists within the geographical area of the Virginia Annual Conference, and the need to be sensitive to that. We have, there is a workshop being offered here on cultural diversity, and actually Reverend Dr. De La Rosa, who is in this room, will be a part of that, and has worked with Hero Park and other members of our interagency task force over the past few months in developing some resource people for different ethnic groups. And I want you to hear today, we have that material at our office, at the Cosroe office. And if you ever run into a situation where you need to consult with someone in a specific ethnic group, know that you can call and we can provide you with that resource. Whether that is Native American Indian or Latina or African American, whatever, okay? So, yes, Larry?
Yeah, and I tried to look through, if we're going to get this later, just tell me the way.
Okay.
So I'm thinking about putting the response team together. What groups in the church will the response team, you suggest, meet with? And so do you need somebody who has some of these but also is good with youth or also understands how to talk with children, those types of things? Mm-hmm.
We will integrate that question, hopefully, throughout everything that we talk about today. Some of my experience in being recruited 10 or so years ago for a response team was by way of my district superintendent. And I am a layperson, I am not clergy. And my district superintendent reached out to her local pastors in her district and said, the bishop wants to put together a response team to respond to incidences of sexual misconduct in the church. Who do you know within your congregations or within your community of resources that you would recommend that we talk to about what this might look like? And so that's how my name was put in the pot, was through the DS contacting her ministers in her district and those ministers giving names of people. And we set up our first training on a Saturday, all day long on a Saturday, and there were about 65 of us in the room. And that dwindled down pretty quickly, and we ended up with maybe 8 or 10 people that were really committed to this and really had the passion and the willingness to make the time commitment to see it get through. And so some of those people that you just named, people who were uniquely known for their ability to interact with children or certain groups were identified through that initial contact. And I'm sure you've got other ways that perhaps. Yes, Steve?
Another group, United Methodist Committee on Relief, spiritual and emotional care teams. Although it requires additional or separate training, they're folks who deal with trauma and the impact of that. And there's a lot of training goes into that.
Would you say that name again?
Committee on Relief, CORE.
Yes, CORE.
They have spiritual and emotional care training. They have a program around that because during a disaster, there's a whole nother realm of stuff that happens. And you need people who focus in that area.
Thank you. Wonderful resource. Yes?
This is not a resource within the church, but well, it is in the church, but not through an agency. But one of the things we've discovered we needed is people with experience and background in the criminal system. And so it helps either to have somebody who can be a consultant for your group or who can be a regular member of your group who has that kind of information. And the other thing is we also now have a team member who specializes in addictive behaviors. And that helps us with pornography and those kinds of things.
So perhaps recruiting people with a criminal experience, background, and addiction information. Criminal justice, yes. Not who has a criminal background. Not who has a criminal background, please. Yeah, that's going to complicate things, I promise. Yeah. Yes.
I'm thinking about recruiting. I'm also thinking about what the role of the response team is, because we're talking a lot about people who would work with individuals, and in our conference, our response team works with a congregation.
Right. We're getting there.
And in those situations, we found it really helpful to have people trained in conflict transformation, in circle processes and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yes. We also have several nurses on our response team, and we have a lawyer, and we also have police officers.
I'm sorry, what was the last one?
Police
officers, nurses.
lawyers.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm from the Sendell Conference, and we have a care team which we respond not just for individuals, but for the congregation as well. And we have policemen and nurses and counselors and those types of persons on ours as well. We do a lot of training that's required by anyone, the lay persons and the congregations as well as pastors. It's required. SCRC.
Wow. That's wonderful.
Yes. In addition to the skill-based sense that people bring and their professional competencies, we found in our early days a criteria that was essential for utilization was a high degree of credibility and knowledge on relationships between the response team members, or at least a few of them, and our cabinet members. Otherwise, utilization wouldn't occur. So while we looked at a wide range of professional competencies and skills, we had to have seated within that group folks with a very high level of trust and a good sense of relationship, just to encourage and maintain usability.
Absolutely. I think it's why we're here, is because we recognize that it as I said in the beginning, it's sort of there's no rhyme nor reason to how some things play out, and how in a not so good way, and then in other situations how they play out in a very healthy, productive, very well balanced and accountability and healing way. So yes, absolutely. And you know, we'll talk about that too in just a minute. But for a lot of people, a lot of their response teams every 4 years, They definitely do trainings and spend time with the cabinet that they are working with. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, because if that trust is not there, then it's not going to be utilized in every situation.
As we respond to certain situations, we will encounter things like people misunderstanding the dynamics. And often sexual misconduct is misunderstood. Sometimes people think that if it's rape, then it's misconduct, but misconduct could be improper joking, improper touching, all kinds of things like that. So it's not necessarily an intense kind of encounter. Also, it's often misnamed. People will say, well, they were two consenting adults and it's an affair, but it cannot be a situation with two consenting adults if you have an imbalance of power. The clergy person is always the one responsible for maintaining the healthy boundaries, so there can be no meaningful consent between two adults in these types of situations. Also, yes?
So when you use clergy, are you also including other staff people?
Well, people in leadership, people of authority.
What about youth counselors who are of adult age?
Yes.
Over 18?
Yes. The person in the position of authority, the person who is leading the situation, whichever it is. Even lay people. This is not all about clergy, but laity as well. Often mishandled. In the past, and unfortunately sometimes currently, we still function under a model of protecting the institution, protecting the pastor, and so the goal is to respond initially in a way that brings forth justice, meaningful justice, accountability to the accused, and also healing for all of the parties involved. The complainant, the responder, the congregation, staff people, everyone. Also, it's often been trivialized, where people would say, well, I'm sure he didn't mean it that way. It was taken out of context, or it wasn't rape, so it can't be sexual abuse or sexual misconduct. So the goal is to kind of overcome these ways of thinking amongst the general congregation, and also people who are responding. Someone alluded to it earlier. We want people who are responding to not be the person to not help the perpetrator be accountable. We don't want people responding helping support that kind of behavior. You had a question.
And if you're going to deal with this later on, then please just let me know. But on the issue of it being misnamed, you brought up the consent and the power dynamics. I am wondering if the approach that you use when even the person who is the victim doesn't name it as such, and you are observing, another person is observing it and naming it as misconduct. When the person who is the victim of it says, oh, I consented, how do you respond to that?
Well, part of the responsibility in responding is to help the person who, the victim or complainant, understand that perhaps, and we'll talk about that later in the,
They're not the complainant, is what I'm saying. And they're actually saying, I consent.
It's been reported by a third person.
What we call. So a third person
Yes.
files a formal complaint.
on behalf,
Or the DS notice, or something, then I'm just curious how you really get to the proper naming of it when most of the people involved aren't naming it properly.
and that's been part of the problem, that we have been misnaming, but it is misconduct if those dynamics are in place. If there is a situation of one in power and a vulnerable person involved. Now, there are situations where people have been uncertain or been afraid, and people have made written complaints on their behalf, trying to help them understand, no, you could not have consented because of the dynamics of the situation. I hope that's
Maybe
helpful.
misnaming is not what she's looking for, maybe it's misunderstood.
Well,
Because somebody else has observed
I think that
it,
takes really good
and
training
they are accepting
across
that
the
it's
board.
okay.
It could be either or. Okay, I guess we can move on.
Speaking of that, you know, naming, we can't do anything about anything until we are able to name it. I mean, and that's just sort of a general truth. If something is not okay, we have to name what the problem is in order to do something about it. And so this is absolutely no different. And I'll just piggyback on that real quickly. It is not unusual for me to receive calls from people who have gone to our website because they have really struggled with feeling like what is happening is not okay, but they're invited to believe that this is not only sanctioned by God, but this is a beautiful and wonderful thing that is happening. And so a lot of confusion. And they begin Googling, and if you Google clergy, sexual ethics, or whatever, oftentimes our website, the umsexualethics.org website, will pop up. And so they would read some articles, and then they would call the number and say, you know, I don't know, I mean, just this past week, I was in a conversation with a woman, and I was saying, you know, but this is not an affair. You're not describing an affair. And let me tell you why. Because what you're describing is a person who is in significant authority and power over you in your position, and has invited you to take this to your grave, were the words. And she, you know, she truly, no part of her believed that this was what it is. And so just to very calmly and graciously, hopefully, walk through that and spend as much time with that person as need be to do the education piece around what this is. And so our church defines this for us. Our church defines this for us, and here it is, right here. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I'm from Pendle again, and we have a care team who does a lot of training. But one thing that we find on behaviors like this situation, this is really an actual case, and dealing with the congregation, and may not be so much on the victim in this name, but the congregation, after it has been disclosed in this violation, has a hard time accepting the fact that it is a sexual misconduct. And it's still not willing and for the congregation to be healed.
Right.
They have to come to that place.
Right.
But the congregation at large won't accept.
Absolutely, and we're going to get to that too. And that is again a beautiful reminder for why this is so important, that the training happen for people who are involved in response to this. Because oftentimes, in some places, the bishop or the DS doesn't go into the church and say to the congregation, this is what actually happened. This was not an affair. This is exactly what happened. And so then you've got a church that is very split, and people leave, and the victim and their family are shunned and invited either verbally or through silence to leave the congregation or move 5 states away or whatever. So it's so critically important that the training take place for the people who are going to be responding. Absolutely. And I am choosing to believe, standing here right now, I am choosing to believe that you have the blessings of your annual conference to be here. Is that safe, Bishop Debbie, for me to assume that your colleagues have in the Council of Bishops have blessed the attendance of the people who are here by saying, this is an issue, this is a problem, this is an area in ministry that we want to give special attention to. So here's the definition. It is out of the Book of Resolutions, and what I want you to understand is that the word sexual misconduct is listed as a chargeable offense in the Book of Discipline. And that is not only for clergy, but it is also for laity as well. So I think Donna and I are in agreement. Oftentimes when we're saying clergy in this today, we're talking about people in ministerial leadership positions, because that's who this pertains to. That's what this is about.
And it's paid or unpaid.
It's paid or unpaid, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm a DS.
Yes.
How do you distinguish sexual misconduct if it's a single clergy or lady who is employed and they are dating someone within that congregation? Because we know that there are clergy who have married people out of their congregation, and I'm single. And I know that all the circles that I travel in are lay people, church-going and active Methodists. How do you distinguish sexual misconduct from situations where we know that an associate pastor is dating someone within that congregation? I'm struggling with that.
Well, yeah, go ahead. We can go ahead and talk about dating.
That's a biggie, and it comes up often, actually from another DS who brought it to our attention. The key is that there cannot be a dating relationship with someone in a congregation. And we've prayed and we've labored, and we've come up with the thought that if this thought comes to mind, if a young single pastor is in a congregation and this thought comes to mind, they cannot date anyone within their congregation. There needs to be discussion immediately contacting the DS. In your case as a DS, you might want to contact your bishop and let them know, have full disclosure, full transparency, that this thought has come to mind, and the person who there's an attraction to may want to consider being under pastoral care of someone else, if that makes sense. I'm not telling them how to do that, but that would be the solution. There have been cases where there have been attractions and measures taken to remove the person in authority from being over pastoral care of that person. I hope that makes sense. And there's a question.
Well, I think also, certainly what you're talking about with clergy and someone in the congregation, that makes sense. But I think in general, when you see a healthy budding relationship, you see it out in the open. And everybody sees that, and it plays out in the open, and you see the healthy stages of dating and all of those things. And what we're talking about is often what is hidden, you know, and
Right.
so I think the full transparency from the very beginning on the part of clergy, or it's just like if you have a staff person, I mean, every church has its own policy, but I think the point is when there's transparency and there's openness and it's kind of in view of everyone and everyone kind of watches a relationship bud, then that to me differentiates
Right,
misconduct.
but it cannot happen.
Right, I'm
yes.
talking outside of the
Yes.
clergy and congregant.
Yes.
But just in general, I think that's a big piece of misconduct is that it's hidden.
Yes, yes. And being a district superintendent, you're pastoral over the whole conference area. Yes, Steve.
I'm concerned with who gets to use the phrase misconduct. And the reason I'm concerned is that there are two very separate contexts. One is a lay context in which a group of people can say, hey, I think that's sexual misconduct, I've read the definition, it's obviously sexual misconduct. But the problem is, the second a conference person uses the phrase, well, that might be sexual misconduct, they've also now created a legal responsibility to follow an investigative process. And so I get a little nervous sometimes as we do training. I think we need to train about what sexual misconduct is, but one of our problems is if we aren't going to then, it's almost like this needs to go to some level of a superintendent or cabinet or assistant to the bishop who then says, yes, we need to call this what it is. But if you call it what it is because you're just out observing it casually and it has not yet been identified with the bishop, you've got a problem now because another clergy member said, well, that's sexual misconduct, and we can create a real legal problem.
Well, there is a process, and every complaint is investigated or looked into.
But it's not a complaint yet, it's an observed behavior. I mean, my problem is, are we talking about after a formal complaint has been filed through a superintendent, are we talking about an observation that has not yet been, if you will, officially documented?
The response would come after a written complaint.
Okay, a written complaint.
Yes.
Okay, I want to be clear because as
Yes.
I'm listening to the talk, sometimes while we're doing training, people will talk about sexual misconduct, and we need to be clear that it does not become an official process until a superintendent or an official person is involved.
Yes. Okay, many questions.
There isn't a complaint that's filed though, because there's never a formal complaint.
Well, then there's not a response. The response begins after the written complaint.
But there might be a response in terms of that person's employment, for example, in their church, right? Where they're
Well, the response team is set in place to respond after a written complaint as part of the process, the resolution process. A response team just doesn't.
Something happens if there's an observed behavior that would qualify as sexual misconduct.
It has to be reported in writing. Yes.
Let me just see if I can respond to this. And this is a beautiful example, and I want to name it right now. This conversation right now is a beautiful example of the fact that these situations are never simple. They are always complex, and this work was never meant. I say that with authority, Donna. It was never, I'm going to say it, it was never meant to be done alone. And is all the more reason that if I were queen, every annual conference would have to have a response team rather than our discipline simply encouraging the use of response teams, because it just makes good sense. Somebody mentioned physical disasters a minute ago. I've lived in a geographical area in Mississippi where we know well what physical disasters are. My church became an American Red Cross disaster shelter 15 years ago. I went through that training, and I still today have that card in my pocket. And we were always prepared, and there was not a question of whether that was the right thing to do or not. We knew it was the right thing to do. And after several hurricanes and the church filled with people on the floor, we knew for certain it was. And so I believe this is the right thing to do. People oftentimes are not ready to make a formal complaint in all situations. And that is simply the reason these have to be handled individually. We can't say, okay, yes, that person, there's nothing else to do other than file a formal complaint. Because sometimes there is something else that can be done where the bishop can work with the person who has brought forth the concern and named the behavior and said, this is what has taken place and this is what it has felt like for me. And they can work through a process, in some situations very similar to a just resolution process that is an option after a formal complaint has been made. And that is happening. That, I will tell you, if it's not happening in your annual conference and you haven't experienced it, you might one day, because that's a fairly, I'm going to go on record as saying it's a pretty common scenario where someone is not ready. You know, I've talked with a woman a couple of weeks ago, and it was like, I'd been talking to her like 6 months probably, and then I get the phone call that says the certified letter has been sent. And she could not do it until that point. She was ready to receive the consequences of making a formal complaint. And if you've done this work, you know that sometimes those consequences can include a bit of re-traumatizing because of how we respond. Okay, I was being nice. A lot of re-traumatizing in the way that it is responded to. And so she was ready to do it at that time, but she could not do it before then. So, Steve, I appreciate your comments. The dating piece, I think Donna did a very good job of sharing that, you know, we're human beings, we're sexual beings. If you're single and in church, there was a time and place where the church was where people met, where single ministers met their future spouse. How many ministers I've had walk up to me and say, I'm glad you weren't teaching this 50 years ago when I met Sally Jane and we are now married 50 years later. And so, you know, it has traditionally served as a place. So to stand here and say that it is unrealistic that a single available minister might not find themselves interested in a parishioner at some point in time, I think is unrealistic. And so I think what we have to do is say, so what can we develop within our annual conferences that addresses this? And I think, you know, basically what Donna said is exactly what I would say. Most, if not all of the materials that I have been trained by strongly discourage dating in your local congregation. Strongly discourage that and suggest that if that happened, that the transparency be upfront and that one of those two people leaves that church so that they are no longer in that position of power and vulnerability as a congregant who's walking in the door vulnerable in a position simply because they're a parishioner, congregant. Yes, wait just a minute. Bonnie, you had your hand up first.
I was just going to say that I was at a faith trust training. It's been a few years, so they may have changed their mind. But at that point, what the comments were that the DS needed to be involved in that relationship. In that the both parties needed to. I didn't say that very well.
We all make mistakes.
Both parties needed to be in contact with the district superintendent on a regular basis as a way of transparency, so that neither party felt they were being pushed into a relationship they didn't want. And it was a way of making the district superintendent aware of what was going on, rather than saying, one of you has to vacate the premises. Because part of the reality is, if that's what we say, it's gonna go secret.
But
They're not gonna tell their district superintendent.
I did say contact the district superintendent.
Right.
And then in the district superintendent's case, to contact the bishop, to include them in that.
The other piece that we're missing is, if you've got a single clergy person, whether it's a male or a female, you're gonna have people in that congregation that say, oh, I know just the perfect person, and they're right here. And so you have that, the congregational pressure also.
Right. That's right. That's right.
I'm a newcomer to this discussion.
Welcome. We're glad you're
I'm
here.
ordained clergy. My career has been in as a faculty member and trainer of therapists in American Family Care. A couple of things I'd just like to clarify. If this really is the definition that then can be moved in the Book of Discipline, there should be case law regarding the definition of continuum. I don't know if any research has been done or any work really at the Council of Bishops level or around continuum. The other thing is that child abuse strikes me as troublesome in that definition, because every state will have these questions answered when it comes to child abuse. And then there's mandated, well, different states, but most clergy fall under some form of mandated reporting. This conversation cannot be used in the same way in responding to child abuse.
That's right.
Okay. The third thing is that, at least in my professional world, a lot of the conversation so far we've had is around what would be called dual relationships.
Absolutely.
And it begins with the understanding that dual relationships, for the most part, cannot be totally avoided.
That's exactly right.
And so the question then is, what is the evidence the dual relationship is being managed properly and carefully, and all the discussion really fits around evidence of that. Then there comes, the other observation I see here is that there is a pretty formal, clear starting point, and that is when the letter or the complaint is received. And the response team's work appears to me to be clearest and cleanest when the complaint. But just as you shared,
That's
Becky,
right.
the response team, or certainly you've been in the role prior to the report, and that seems to me, at least as I'm still learning, to be the least defined area of this effort that we're about right now. Those are my observations.
Yes, and I would say yes, 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 and yes to those observations, which and you say the word boundaries, and oftentimes clergy just go, oh, have I got to sit through that again? And yes, and the answer to that is yes, because of this time of conversation. I don't know that we can ever talk about this too much. Because of the dual relationship, ministry invites boundary crossing, I think, regularly. You pick up the phone or you walk in someone's hospital room when you have not been called by that patient, but you've been notified by someone in the grocery store that John had his gallbladder removed this morning, and you say, I'm on my way to the hospital, I'll stop by his room when I'm visiting the other person that I'm there to visit. And so officially, a boundary is crossed when you walk in that room. There's a difference between boundary crossing and boundary violation. And if we turn to Jesus, Jesus crossed boundaries regularly. He ate with the people that no one else ate with, and he did a whole lot of stuff that no one else was doing. But we don't read of Jesus causing harm. And so that wasn't to you, even though I was looking at you with that intensity. I know. I'm just responding to what you said. That that we do have to be clear about that. We absolutely do. And the reality is, and we are jumping ahead, but we'll talk just a little more in detail about the issue of power and vulnerability. Because again, we are in this room to talk about the reality of recruiting and training a response team who responds after the receipt of a formal complaint of sexual misconduct, and the bishop has said, this has happened, and oftentimes when the bishop says this has happened, that if it's a clergy person, that clergy person is removed. Even if that's temporarily, they are removed. And the bishop says, and the DS says, we want to send this team into the congregation and begin the process of healing that is absolutely necessary for this congregation to face what has happened and to begin to move through that work of the trauma that they have experienced secondary as the congregation. But we are going to talk about this in a lot of detail in just a minute.
It's important for us to respect our boundaries because we have, the response team has a process, there's a judicial process going on,
Right. And
there may be a criminal process going on as well.
That's right.
And if we sort of weave too much into what's right and who did, then we're violating our response.
That's exactly right. As a response team, yes.
Is that defined somewhere? Is that written?
What response teams?
The role, the boundary of response?
Well, I've got a slide for you. I'll show it to you. Okay. There's a whole bunch of hands, and I know you've had your hand up a whole bunch.
Just to drop a resource into the conversation about clergy dating parishioners or within a congregation, Karen LeBlanc's book, Sex in the Parish, has a nice definition that summarizes part of our conversation about the elements that if you ignore the advice folks give you and still want to find somebody that loves Jesus in the United Methodist Church, what do? That we transparency, issues of no secrecy, being sure a supervisor knows, and it's expanded a little bit in one of her co-authored books, Sex in the Parish.
Would you say the title of that book again?
Sex in the Parish by the ethicist Karen LeBlanc.
Sounds like that would be a good resource for us to have on our website as well for people. Yeah. Larry?
Yeah, just trying to think how to ask this. So would there ever be a case of sexual misconduct where the team should not be invited into the congregation? I mean, there's, to me, that's my thing is, the DS and the bishop still has to invite the team, but if it's been sexual misconduct.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nodding my head. If you want to respond,
as this is brought to the DS and then on to the bishop, then they make that determination. Now, sometimes that's good or bad, but that is within the realm of the bishop making that determination. Yes, indeed, I think the problem comes up criminal issues, where we don't want to jeopardize the criminal process by bringing a lot of people in. And if we aren't well defined, then we can get ourselves in trouble.
Well, okay, you're shaking your head. Help me out.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But if it's been sexual misconduct, there shouldn't be any question.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna respond, but Molly and okay.
So one thing, and I lived through a situation where a nursery worker was arrested for molesting children in the church.
Right.
And he was lay, so he was arrested. The criminal process played out, but the response team was not invited in.
Right.
And it was on the heels of other sexual misconduct and that sort of thing. And the response team was never invited in.
Right.
Because it was, I guess, up to the discretion of, I don't know who, maybe the staff parish, I don't know. The response team never came in. It was never explored why safe sanctuary wasn't followed. No formal complaints because they weren't clergy. No formal complaints were ever filed. We never filed, maybe we do. In general, I have not seen formal complaints filed against lay people. Maybe others have. But usually we just let the criminal process play out. So for me, I have a problem with the fact that this is optional at all.
Yeah.
And I think it's problematic. And I think that I know, even all these years later, having moved away, I still deal with this.
We're
Right.
still, it's raising
Right.
its head again.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That same
So-
situation.
Exactly.
We happen to be from the same.
And it is, I would like to go on record, and Bishop Debbie, please, you didn't know you were going to get pulled into this, but please correct me if I'm wrong. It is my understanding it is left up to the bishop. It is the bishop's discretion whether the response team goes into the situation or not. Often the bishop is in consultation with the DS that is involved in that particular district. But it is my understanding that it's always the bishop's responsibility to deploy a response team or not. This is what I get a little nervous about in this conversation, is that in any situation we would suggest that staff or the congregation or the camp leaders or wherever the setting is, that we would suggest at any level that there is not a need for the opportunity to intentionally look this in the eye and say, let's figure out what we need to really move forward and heal. And as with any grief work, the opportunity is always there in doing grief work to come out of that work better able to love than before. And so I have seen congregations who move through this with the help of response teams and come out much healthier as a church than they ever were before. As a matter of fact, where they would say, this happened 15 years ago in this church, and this is what we did not do. And we brushed it under that proverbial rug and hoped and prayed that it would never raise its ugly head again. And yet the reality is, every time something went awry in this church, that stuff creeped back into the conversation because it was not dealt with. Yes?
What I'm hearing that I really am appreciating hearing is Molly or Molly?
Molly.
Molly, okay. That when you made that comment about relationships in the congregation, as we were talking about the dating and all that, and then I've heard other folks say that the importance of the transparency is critical in order to help that become a possible healthy, good relationship if it goes that way. And the same thing is true with what we're talking about, that when certain conferences or cabinets or the bishops have the concern, I understand they would have concern about wanting to be sure that their response team is trained and understands how to go about doing the response in the congregations. But the fact that we still, I love your picture of the person with their head in the sand, because that secrecy and a fear of avoidance is what keeps us, I think, in this whole cycle of not having response teams go in. And so it all seems to be about transparency and openness and exposing the elephant that's in the room in all these various settings. And that's the thing for me I found frustrating, that as a layperson on the crisis team, that we've worked really hard to be trained, and so sometimes I understand the fears and concerns of the legal issues. I understand that, but at the same time, how are we going to ever help with the healing, like you said, if we know don't begin to open up the stigma and taboo and the things that continue to keep that in hiding.
Yes, take a couple more questions and then let's move forward or we'll never get through the first 5.
I'm just saying the role of our response team has to be as advocates for congregations, for victim survivors, and for accused and perpetrators. And regardless of what the response becomes, to have that consultation with the Episcopal leader as they determine what level of response and what's necessary. Bishops and dioceses have their own agendas, and can become narrowly focused about their own agendas, protecting the church, protecting this. And without that outside voice saying, how about the care and health of the congregation? How about the care and health of the perpetrator or those who are victims or survivors? We really have that important voice to provide both corrective and advocacy in the midst of crisis when folks can be so narrow.
It's crucial. It's absolutely crucial. Yes.
In response to saying that nothing was ever done,
Yes.
our response team has gone back into a church after 15 years. So, ask for a response team. The church had become toxic. It had never been dealt with. Not a single pastor after that had a good ministry there. And so you need it.
Yeah. And every one of us in this room know that church, don't we? We've either been a member there or you've served there where it wasn't dealt with. And it continued to perpetuate itself in different ways. Yeah. So it is. Yeah. And so what's being offered up is another beauty of a response team is the opportunity to be creative in how it is used. Some annual conferences, and we have this as well, but some annual conferences use the response team for other issues than just sexual misconduct. Yeah, when there's money issues or whatever. Oh. Yeah. I just want to reiterate on that slide regarding sexual misconduct. That is the definition that is set forth by the church, and absolutely in any training and anything that is ever written on our website or wherever, there is always special attention given to the mandated reporting when it involves a child or a vulnerable adult. And in some states, ministers, clergy are not mandated to make that report. What has been interesting is the number of annual conferences in those places that have their own ethics accountability covenant that says, oh, absolutely, if we become aware of this or suspect this, we will make this report. So, but yes, absolutely. Sexual harassment is included in the definition of sexual misconduct. The most common situations that we at our office receive are situations where a person, clergy or lay, believes that what they have experienced has been harassment because of their gender. That's that, and again, I'm just saying that's the most common. That's not all, but that's the most common. And then that goes on to further define sexual abuse. Pornography is also included in that. I want you to know that the word pornography, I'm always willing to put myself out here like this because I really want to know the right answer. It is my understanding the word pornography is not mentioned in the Book of Discipline. In terms of identifying it as problematic. We at COSRO, our board, voted to introduce a petition next summer that adds pornography to the social principles and builds upon this. So this is a really, it has continued. I don't have to tell you this. You all know this. The issue of pornography, and somebody mentioned addiction specialist, whether they're on your team or they come in to speak to your team. That's a wonderful resource to have a connection with. We're talking about a sacred trust here, and you have that. Ministers, clergy, ministerial leaders have that as a result of the position they're in. The Book of Discipline, paragraph 361, specifically says, ministerial leaders hold a sacred trust. You have a fiduciary responsibility. And what does that mean? It means I'm always going to act in the best interest of the other. And so we get back to the conversation earlier about, well, is it sexual misconduct? Is it not? Do you report it? Do you not? Just sort of a baseline might be, is this in the best interest of who is being served here? And then the final statement on that slide that says, when a clergy colleague violates the sacred trust of ordination, the ministry of every Christian is undermined. And for me, that is a very powerful, powerful, powerful statement. Oh, question? I'm sorry.
I'm wondering, what does this look like? What does it look like when a response team comes in? I mean, the Avent Church is light years behind everybody else when it comes to this. So I know that my people are thinking that this is like a drug raid.
The first one I went in on looked like a drug raid for the most part. I mean, we did everything you should not do, we did in our first response. So there's been a lot of trial and error in my experience of learning how to do this better.
That's a serious issue.
Yeah.
That's a cultural issue.
Yeah.
It could be
a drug raid. Absolutely, it could. And so, okay, I promise we're gonna get to that piece of what does the response team look like. What we are attempting to do is to lay the groundwork here. Again, if you're gonna go back and train a response team, we believe this is information that is crucial for this response team to have. There has got to be conversation among the people who are going to be going into these situations about what is this in the church. I tell people what I do in my family or my best friends, and they'll go, "Are you serious?
Yeah, right.
You would respond to something if they're quote peers, because they don't see it as a problem. They don't recognize this as a problem. You have something happen within a corporation. Oftentimes a response team is not brought into that corporation if our definition of sexual misconduct happens. So it is unique. It is unique. And it's unique because of this sacred trust. It's unique because of the position of power and vulnerability that establishes relationships throughout ministry. Again, whether you're the senior pastor and a member in the pew, whether you are the bishop and this is one of your ministers, whether you are the camp leader, the youth leader, whatever. It's about being in relationship with power and vulnerability. And I think your response team people have to understand that. They have to understand that because you're going to be met with disbelief, shock, all of that stuff where they're going to go, we will never pay another penny of apportionments. If this is the way the annual conference is going to respond to this and embarrass us in our community and humiliate our church by coming in, you better bet we'll never pay another penny of apportionments. So we're going to talk about that delicate dance of the team coming in. You had a question at some point. I've forgotten it. I'm sorry. If you have, please write down your question. please write it down and make sure we get it so that we can get them answered in here or out of here. Yes?
If I can just say something real briefly to sort of maybe ratchet down the anxiety level for people who are new at this. We have had numerous occasions where after our team has gone in to respond to a situation in the congregation, and we don't go in like a drug bust, it's very calm. And we do it in concert with the local leadership. But in fact, it was just a week ago, I had a pastor who said to me, I have always had trouble understanding the benefit that our church receives from our apportionment dollars, and now I understand.
Wow.
So that.
And I think in this afternoon's session, we will go more into detail about the process of a response team when they enter a congregation. So I hope you're registered for that one as well. I just want to say a brief word about the types of abusers. There are basically two types. One are wanderers and the other are predators. The wanderers are people who just oftentimes just use bad judgment and not maintaining healthy boundaries. Their actions are not necessarily premeditated. And so in dealing with responding to these different type of persons, your response will probably be different. The predators are a completely different story. A lot of these people sort of groom, they take the time to groom people that they want to abuse. They strategically place themselves in positions of authority so that they can have access to vulnerable people. They do strategically look in the congregation who is the most vulnerable. The prognosis for change for the predators is really fair to poor. This is these people's nature. Counseling may or may not help them. But for the wanderers, there's a good possibility for rehabilitation, for true repentance, and moving on to have healthy ministries. So one of the reasons why we keep having incidences of sexual misconduct is because of predatory behaviors, and they don't get help, and they're moved from place to place, and the situation just continues to get worse and worse. So just want to throw this out, that these are two of the types of individuals that we will run into in responding to situations. And part of the work of the response team is to walk alongside of the respondents, the ones who are being accused. Did you want to talk about? Okay. Some of the common traits of abusers: they're controlling, they're domineering, limited self-awareness as it relates to maintaining healthy boundaries. They exercise poor judgment, and they get to a point where it doesn't matter. They want this behavior at this particular time with this particular person, so they're willing to take a chance and risk their whole reputation, their position as a pastor, as a religious leader. Narcissistic, limited understanding of the consequences, feeling that because of their position of authority that they're untouchable, that people will not believe the person who comes forward with the complaint. Often motivated by a desire for power, control, and the sexual act, and that sense of entitlement. I'm the pastor. I have a right to and this is an unhealthy perspective, but I have a right to have my way because of my position of authority. People will see me as a representative of God. They're often charismatic, very excellent leaders, appear to be sensitive and very effective in ministry, where people would say, oh no, I can't believe that this pastor would do this. So these type of traits allow abusers to continue in their acts of abuse. Marie Fortune, I'm sure many of us are familiar with her work at Faith Trust Institute. And Marie says it's never okay. Never. That's a clear word. There are not occasions when sexual misconduct is okay. And it's never simple, as we've seen by our discussion, as we will see this afternoon with the panel discussion. The situations are just never simple, and often by them being mishandled initially, by the time it becomes a complaint, or by the time the bishop hears of it, or certainly by the time the response team gets to respond, it's a mess. And so it's more difficult to repair damage as it has escalated than it is to respond right initially. And then her other statement, it is always the pastor's responsibility to maintain those healthy boundaries. There is no such thing as it's an affair, that's unacceptable, or it's two consenting adults because of the imbalance of power. And again, the pastor is always the keeper of that trust. It is always the ministerial leader's responsibility to maintain that healthy boundary. Yay.
So just real quickly to recap the power and vulnerability piece. Power really is about having greater resources. We consider ourselves probably successful people. And when we walk into a church as a worshiper, we walk in a position of vulnerability. We're walking in that church because there's greater resources than what we believe we have at that point. And so automatically it puts us in a vulnerable position. And again, power, we really can't talk about power unless we're talking about it in relation, okay? Because that's what gives it power. And power is neither good nor bad. It is. It is. It's like fire. It can cook a wonderful meal, and it can destroy a beautiful home. So it is power, and we know people who use it well, and we know people who misuse it in a very unhealthy and unproductive way also. The vulnerability, person who is in that position walks in, automatically has fewer resources. That's a huge thing for us to remember. That when we're doing this work in response, that this inequality exists in these situations, because it is so easy to, you know the person. You were in seminary with the person. You roomed with the person in seminary. I mean, the stories, you know these stories. They just keep going and keep going and keep going. This is your star person in your annual conference that this complaint has been filed against. And it's very easy to forget this crucial piece that we're talking about very unequal positions in this relationship. So with vulnerability comes fewer resources, and with fewer resources comes the potential for being helped or hurt. Probably one of the most powerful statements in summarizing that I latched onto in a training was how quickly a person in a leadership position can go from the compassionate caregiver to the oppressor. How quickly they can do it. And you open up the paper. I mean, I haven't looked at it. I haven't looked at news and don't need to look at news right now. But we read about it all the time, how quickly that can happen. Yes?
If we could go back to that.
Yes,
slide, please.
absolutely.
Thank you. I am a veteran of the military and found that in that culture, there was great understanding about power, especially between officers and enlisted, and how that impacts the mission of the unit. And therefore, the entire system, for the most part, understood why an officer cannot date an enlisted person, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I find in the church, and I'm an adult convert, and so I didn't grow up with all this all around me, the people do not basically accept the difference in the power between a pastor and a parishioner. And I'm wondering if it would help to speak more about the mission of the church in this kind of a slide, so that we can say, and here's one thought that I just had, a pastor can significantly impact the parishioners' understanding of their relationship with God and their salvation. That's the resource and power that they have. They could convince a person that they are going to hell, or what, whatever. But the parishioner is not going to be able, doesn't have that same power with regard to the pastor. And so I just would like to have more conversation about what the nature of that power is, what the resources are, because, so that people can really get to understand this is real. Then we'll stop having a conversation about informed or consent and affairs and all of that.
Right. Absolutely. And we can spend a few minutes on that conversation. As you were talking and you were describing the relationship between the different levels in the military, I was thinking, wow, as ministers and people in leadership in ministry, how often you're called into a person's life at the most intimate times of their life. For some people, it is hugely important that if they or a family member are dying, that the pastor be right there. I have said to some of my dearest people, one being in this room, that if I were dying, I would want you by my side. That's what you give to me. That's what you bring to me. A level of comfort and calmness that I would not question. And so, perhaps within our churches we need to be having more, and within our ministry settings we need to be having more of this conversation. It is certainly a priority for my position at COSRO, is that there will be more priority put on resources that go into local ministry that have this conversation among laity, rather than limiting it just to sexual ethics and boundary training for clergy. And I know that's happening a lot of places, but again, it's not happening uniformly. And so we would like to do that. But the whole piece of coming into such intimate moments, really for me, and I'm speaking totally for me, frame how powerful the power is, because you're already vulnerable, but you're really even more vulnerable as a result of the atmosphere of those moments that leaders are called in. So that's just to kick it off. Yeah.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what she said, in our conference, we of course train both clergy and lay people, but we find that so many of our pastors are having a problem with acknowledging that they have power. So they easily move across the boundaries or because they're not getting it.
Well,
Yes.
I think that comes from the fact that clergy, you're moved at someone else's discretion. You're going to a church that you didn't pick. You don't have control over where you live. You don't have control over where your children are going to school, what church you're going to be serving, or how many. So I think clergy sometimes feel powerless.
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I saw a lot of heads nodding on that. Yes.
And that's because they're thinking about their relationship to the conference, not to the local church to which they've been appointed.
Beautiful point. Wow, that is an excellent point. Excellent point.
Actually, it's because so many of them are under the gun. There's financial pressures. The attendance is down. The PPRs are really. The people in the churches are very mean to clergy at times, and they feel like they do not have power.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they don't have it, but they perceive they do not have power.
I saw something the other day, and I thought, I've not ever seen it. You may know all about this, and I would love to be in conversation with you about it. But a covenant for pastors regarding their power, and upon ordination or throughout. At different times, periodically, in trainings, there would be literally a written covenant that almost a little bit of a I don't know the right word, ritual came to mind, where a clergy person would read aloud, I acknowledge the power that is automatic because of the position I am in as a ministerial leader. And I vow to do X, Y, Z, whatever how you wanted to create it. And I am in covenant with you that, and whoever you is, the bishop and cabinet, the annual conference, the congregation, I don't know. When I saw it, I just immediately thought, my goodness, this would be a powerful piece that you would literally go through, acknowledging the power that because at some level, you just got to make a decision whether you're going to believe you have power or not, I think. Because you do. You do. You may not feel like you do, and I understand all those reasons why. And you do. You are in a position of power. That was right there beside a Bill of Rights for clergy. I'm sorry? Absolutely. That's exactly what I thought. This would be a great sample covenant that you could just download and create it the way you wanted to create it. And also a Bill of Rights between the staff parish, the congregation, and the clergy person. The clergy has a Bill of Rights, and those rights include taking really good care of themselves, which includes having Sundays off every now and then. And yeah, okay. So, Preston, do you have your hand up?
Well, I'm just, in terms of power.
Yes.
If you start with, can I help? Can I be helpful to other people?
Yes.
Of course you can. And do I have access to resources? The pulpit?
Yes.
Vulnerable times in people's lives?
Right.
Therefore, power. So it's almost as if I need to decide that I understand that I have power from what that I can do and what's available for me to do the power, to do the work of ministry, therefore. So it's almost starting from that point rather than starting to I have power.
Right.
Right. That's the result.
Right. And that's a great point. Great point. Yes, Molly.
I think there's also, when we're talking about clergy and their power, it's important to know, though, that they also bump up against lay people who in the rest of their life sometimes also have a lot of power and are accustomed to exerting that power. And I think it's important to remember that clergy, and I think we all know this, can certainly fall victim to sexual harassment and all. So sure, in misconduct, when they've taken part in misconduct, they are the responsible person, and I get that. But there are certainly instances where they are the victim too, and so it's important not to overlook that and assume some fault on their part as if they could have prevented that.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. Thank you. And this isn't always women who are victims either.
Right.
If that has not been said, that needs to be said. So a real quick follow-up to the piece about power. I love this thought that your ministry is not about you and it's all about you. And ministry by definition is itinerant. Go in, do what you can do, and move on. And you do have power. You do have amazing power that comes in the form of your wisdom and your ability to help a person understand their relationship with God. You get to choose how you're going to use that. You are going to be adored. People will adore you. Be careful about that, because when you allow that to happen, you automatically set the stage for people that will encourage you almost. That's not the right word. I shouldn't say that. The stage is set when you are adored to believe that you are invincible. Exactly. So be careful about that. And then remember this fiduciary duty, that the fact of unequal power does require a responsibility to act in the best interest on the part of the person in leadership, the minister. This is
I decided to file a formal complaint with United Methodist Church. I knew it would be humiliating, but I couldn't let this happen to anyone else. I will be forever grateful to the district superintendent who heard my complaint. He could see that I was traumatized. He believed me. He prayed with me for my family. He told me what would happen next, and he and the bishop worked very closely with me, explaining processes that I was too upset to fully understand.
Sometimes it helps to hear the voice, to hear the words. Sometimes it helps to hear the voice. How's that? Hear the words spoken clearly by one who has experienced this firsthand. This is a slide that gives you the overview of the complaint process, and I have another little handout that is making sure you get your money's worth, but it just identifies the important pieces in the discipline and resolutions regarding this whole subject matter and the response to it. Again, why is this slide up here? It is crucial that I think that your response team understand what the process is. Some response teams do offer themselves as a resource for individual support
to different parties in the complaint. Not all do, but some do. And some of you are nodding your head that your team does. So that you are a resource, you are a pool that the bishop can draw from, that can assign an individual to walk alongside the accused or the victim. So it's important that you understand as a response team what the complaint process looks like. Upon receipt of the formal complaint, and what makes a formal complaint? It is written and it is signed. It is written and it is signed. Can a DS file a formal complaint? Absolutely. And that oftentimes I see that happening when a person has come forward to a DS saying, this is a problem, and I want this to stop, and I don't know what to do, and I'm scared, and they do not believe at that point that they have what it takes to actually sign their signature and file that formal complaint. Upon receiving that information and doing some follow-up work on that information, a DS can make the decision to file the formal complaint. So that happens. I'm going to use the word often. It definitely happens, where DSs are the ones who intervene. I say to DSs, do not discount. Do not just throw that away because it's not written and signed. This is important information for you to pay attention to. This is important information for you to be aware of. Sometimes I hear stories, and you've heard these stories too, where the person went to someone in a leadership position and shared with them what had happened 5 years ago, and they were discounted because they had lost their job or whatever, and everybody just thought they were an angry, disgruntled employee and gave it no attention whatsoever. And 5 years later, there's other stuff happening, and other people are coming forward with similar stories. So it's not information to discount as far as the DS is concerned. Receipt of the complaint, correct me again, Bishop Debbie, if I'm wrong on this. Bishop Debbie is the president of General Commission on the Status and Role of Women's Board of Directors, so we work her to death in that role. So receipt means the bishop has read it. So if it arrived in the bishop's office and the bishop is in the Holy Lands, the bishop has not received it. Okay? So receipt means the bishop has read it. And then there is a 90-day period that the supervisory process begins. There's a possibility of one 30-day extension to be granted if the work is not done in 90 days. And the only other exception to that is if the civil authorities are brought in any shape, form, or fashion, and then the case can be held in abeyance. That is a new addition to the discipline as a result of the 2012 General Conference.
Tell me more about abeyance.
Abeyance is, and anybody feel free to jump in here on that. Abeyance is literally the term that references that a complaint has now been turned over, or civil authorities have been brought in as well. Reports have been filed, or charges have been filed. Sexual misconduct by clergy is a criminal offense in 13 states. Yeah. Sexual misconduct by clergy is a criminal offense in 13 states.
Sexual misconduct against children may be in more than 13 states.
Oh, in all states. Absolutely, absolutely. But this is sort of new, where clergy are now looked at as therapists or doctors, and if they are violating those professional boundaries, criminal charges can be filed. So my understanding, the last time I checked, it was still only 13 states. Mississippi's one of those. Yes.
My understanding of abeyance is that your 90-day clock stops running when there are criminal charges,
Absolutely.
for example.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's the other piece of that. Yes, the 90 days stops because this is no longer just a church matter. It is also a matter of the civil authorities. And so that 90 days does not.
I would just want to clarify, civil authorities means not ecclesial authorities. The civil authorities sometimes are criminal investigations.
Absolutely.
As opposed to like a court.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
It can also be protective services. It doesn't have to be a police. It can be like adult protective services or child protective services.
Right. Where the alleged misconduct, it becomes known that this is also a form of abuse against a vulnerable person because of a disability or whatever, and a report would be made to DHS. Just one second. Yes.
And that's where some of the complexity comes in for me. And so at what point does the response team then engage? You know, when there's so many layers, and I would say with Molly's situation, you know, handed it off and then we never came back and picked up the ball and did our.
So what's being said is that's where some of the complexity comes in, especially in regard to the use of a response team. If civil authorities are brought in, I would say in that just a scenario in that situation that if a bishop has received that formal complaint and has confirmed that this is credible, that may have taken place earlier in that 90-day period, and that team may have already been deployed to that congregation or to that ministry setting. And then as other things unfold and other entities get involved in this from a criminal standpoint, again, that's where, to me, the creativity and the beauty of a response team can come into play. Is so now what does the church need? Now what does the staff need? And you would, follow-up is hugely critical in this work. And this is not, it is not recommended that you just send a response team in, they spend 1 hour, and then they bye-bye, and nobody ever follows up and does anything with this congregation again. As in any grief work, I would say that first year is crucial to the healing of this trauma, and that there would be periodic points that the team would be. You agree with that, Donna? Okay. Yes.
Certainly in other professions, the supervisory level, like the DS, back to your comment, the DS could choose to file a complaint. Okay.
Yes.
Certainly in other professions, the supervisory level person who has information regarding misconduct can be included in litigation. Certainly in the Roman Catholic experience of litigation, the supervisory level person certainly has been identified and recognized and verified as a source of litigation.
Right.
In the United Methodist Church's experience so far, has there been any kind of incident yet where the role of the DS has been specifically identified as negligent?
Yes. Yes.
Is that being taken seriously, or is there a parallel movement within, because that's, DSs are pastors too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Involved in a couple of cases right now where that is an issue, where the DS did not take the information forward. Several situations where that is, and so the complaint now is about, ineffectiveness and negligence on the part of the
So the
GS.
boundary of response teams and annual conferences. I've been gathering this primarily in relation to congregations and perhaps individuals.
Right.
Is there any response team whose role and function has been identified as including the cabinet?
Bonnie, you may speak to that. You've been doing this a long time. I've had a cabinet contact me when there has been some significant trauma to come in and spend some time with that cabinet around exactly what we're talking about, the process of looking at what is happening, understanding better what is happening, the opportunity to process through some feelings and reactions to what is happening, and begin moving through that work that is so important in that. But yeah, Bonnie, go ahead.
Several years ago, we had something we called sacred space conversations, and it happened in conjunction with the Bishop Symposium. So what we did was all of the laity from the Oregon, Idaho, and the Pacific Northwest conference response teams were made available to be there to work with small groups of pastors, of clergy, no more than like 8 or 10 in a group. And we asked one question, and we gave them 2 hours to answer it, and we had one lay conference response team member that worked specifically with just the cabinet. And that one question they were asked was, how has clergy sexual misconduct impacted you personally and professionally? 2 hours was not enough time for them to talk about it all. And a lot of the things that came out of there when we debriefed later were the really painful experiences they'd had when they'd gone into a church that had had misconduct, did not know about it. And one clergy person said, we had a 100-year celebration, and I invited all of the clergy that had been there before, and one of them was an extremely offending pastor, and he came.
Yes.
And she said, I re-victimized my congregation all over again. So we've worked with that. What the feedback we get is often if a clergy person is and owns up to being guilty of sexual misconduct, it impacts every clergy that they know. It often will impact a lot of churches because it's like, well, I thought he was a really nice pastor, or she was a really nice pastor, and can I trust my pastor now? And conference response teams go a long way to helping congregations work through that. And a lot of times we see guilt in the congregation. How come I didn't know? We should have been able to do something. So response teams can be very helpful if they're used.
And you know, I'm standing here thinking, and what a beautiful opportunity for education as well. When we talk about understanding this power and understanding all of this, when we're educating at that level, we're not, I mean, that is just so hugely important. Thank you for sharing.
Supervisory negligence.
Absolutely.
It's not at this point broadly identified as an issue that the bishop or the cabinet would expect response team to take into their parameters as far as education, partnership, and an effective response team could put at risk the superintendent.
Yeah. So my answer to that, and Donna, help me, anybody in here help me, my answer to that is no. That is not a standard use of response teams at this point. Yes, but my goodness, what a crucial point you have made there. Absolutely. And I said at the beginning, a lot of annual conferences definitely go in, and their response team goes in and speaks to the cabinet at least every 4 years, so that the cabinet sees faces, knows what they do, has the opportunity to understand what the role is. Yeah. Yes. You want to do these statistics?
Would there be resources if something happened on a conference level, like between colleagues or something like that?
Let me make sure I understand your question. Are there resources?
If something for the clergy, I mean, similar question, but if the abuse or the misconduct happened between clergy or the bishop or I mean,
oh yeah,
in those, are there
yeah
general church resources like beyond the conference?
Well, again, it depends on what exists in the particular annual conference or the jurisdiction where, yes. But, jurisdiction and the College of Bishops gets called into this when the complaint is against a bishop. And the complaint is given to the president of the College of Bishops. We get called every now and then on some of those situations because the alleged victim doesn't know who to turn to for the most part. And so we certainly encourage the identification of a support person for that alleged victim immediately as can be done after the complaint has been received and the process starts going. So I think I'm not trying to be vague, but I think my answer to that is that again it depends what the resources that are available depend on the jurisdiction, the annual conference that the situation takes place in. We say that in phone call conversations all the time. You can call here all day long, and we want you to call anytime you want to, and we'll give as much time as needs to be given to walk alongside you with this. However, this has to be resolved within your annual conference, within your jurisdiction. That's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. But we certainly will offer ourselves to help identify resources that are available. Many of you, your name is probably on a list that's in that packet. Some of you have agreed to be a contact person for the development of response teams in your annual conference. And that's another goal, is that we will develop a really good cohesive network of people throughout the United Methodist Church that will be doing this work, that will be actively involved in responding to this work, including the Philippines. Phoebe is here, just flew in from the Philippines. So, and we have 3 participants from Africa and 1 from Russia who are here as well for that.
We just had enough context. One of our desires is being able to develop some ecumenical resourcing in Virginia. So we've just connected with our Lutherans and Episcopal folks who also have response teams in anticipation of thinking there are appropriate times when we need a different set of folks or a group of folks who sort of, quote, don't have a dog in that fight, end quote. And that provides, the hope is that provides some geographical depth to our bench in places that would be difficult to get everybody around in a responding place, since we have similar theologies and ways of working in terms of congregational healing. We're not very far along, but it's an exciting venture, and I think lift that up to others for a possibility.
Absolutely. This is a resource that's just up here. You can write that. These are free of charge. They're put out by the Mennonite denomination, and it is Understanding Sexual Abuse by a Church Leader or Caregiver. It's just got some really good information in it, so I just brought one out for you. But yes, absolutely, our ecumenical partnership is such a valuable resource.
And as Becky said in response to the question about responding to if a DS is involved, no, there's typically not the role of the response team, but part of being on the response team is to provide advocates or care team people who walk alongside someone. So certainly an advocate or a care person could be assigned to that DS to walk alongside them in a situation like that. Want to say a real quick word about some eye-opening statistics in regard to complaints. These statistics are a little dated. They're a few years old, but just in the United Methodist Church, there is an average between 140 and 500 known cases of sexual misconduct annually. And that the question is, how many are not known? How many go unreported or unresolved? How many are not responded to? So that's a big number of known cases, and those that are unknown are probably significantly higher. Also, between 2000 and 2010, the United Methodist Church spent over $100 million adjudicating cases. Now, if they're handled correctly initially, then I'm sure that that number would be significantly reduced. One of the main things that we, and I might be getting ahead, but it's just believe the person. That goes a long way to let them know, look, I am so sorry this has happened to you. That's a mantra that we use in the North Carolina Conference. To at least believe that the situation happened rather than the response being, oh no, I just can't believe. I went to seminary with that pastor. This is a very effective pastor. They've grown the church. I just don't believe that they would have done this. Just stating that you're sorry goes a long way. And then responding according to the actual response process. And I want to add also that response teams don't necessarily participate in disciplinary actions. They don't necessarily participate in judicial actions. The main role of the response team is for healing and care. And so those areas are areas where other teams lead in that, but the response team is primarily offering healing and care. Also, another Marie Fortune mantra, there can be no healing without justice, and justice requires courage. Clearly, the faith community plays a major role in this situation. Often, the church drops the ball. As I just said, we don't initially respond in a way that makes the person feel like the church is trying to do something. We roll into the institutional protection model, protecting the church and the integrity of the pastor. Part of justice making involves acknowledging the ministerial misconduct. Again, the church protection model misnames it as an affair and minimizes the situation.
So that, to me, this piece is just, it points out how important it is that we pay attention to what our language is in response. Because that's what this first piece says. It says, what language are you using? Are you calling this an affair, or are you naming this what it is?
Okay, part of the justice-making model looks at justice for everyone involved, even justice for the offender. Oftentimes, they need pastoral care as well. They need counseling as well. And then again, on the protecting the church model, we want to protect the institution. We want to put our head in the sand and pretend like it didn't happen. We want the complainant to just go away. If they go away, then we don't have to address the situation. We don't have to report it or respond to it. Under the justice-making model, we bring healing, not just. Yeah, that's okay. I wasn't going to say lightly. We want to heal, yes. But that healing, again, goes for all parties involved. The complainant needs healing, but also their families. The perpetrator needs healing, but also their families. And again, the congregation needs healing. In the church protection model, they probably don't even get "I'm sorry," or maybe that's all they get. But there is not an intentional approach to a deeper type of healing. A response team may not even be involved in the protecting the church model. And then the final thing is, under justice making, restitution for the victim. Asking the victim, what is it that you need for your healing? Oftentimes, for their healing, they may just need to have the plaque out of the fellowship hall with the name of the pastor on it, or just an apology. That may be all they need, or they may need counseling. So asking them what they need and providing what they need. Also, why we need response teams. Some more statistics. In a polling of 6,000 United Methodists, it was revealed that half of all lay women and 1/3 of laymen were witnesses or actually victims of some degree of clergy misconduct. Or other leader, yes, in the church. Those are stifling numbers. Either aware or have been victims. Then 17% of all lay women reported being sexually harassed by their pastors. Again, sexual harassment could be in the form of an improper touch, an improper word, statement, some form other than having sexual intercourse. 40% of clergy women reported being sexually harassed by a colleague or a pastor. That's totally unacceptable. That's low? Well, I said these numbers are a little bit dated. Whew. Okay. Okay. The use of response teams. The reason why response teams are important, at least one of the reasons, is because responding to actions of misconduct can be better lived out by a team rather than one individual. Again, with the response teams, you have many, many different people with many, many different gifts. You have people who have experience as pastors. You have people that have experience as social workers. You have people who have experience as counselors. We named some more people who have had experience dealing with criminals or criminal justice. We want to get that right. And so we bring a lot of different gifts to the response teams. Again, response teams help assign and manage the complexity of roles required for a comprehensive and effective process. And that's why it's important to have people with various gifts. Another type of person that is very helpful on response teams that can bring a lot of experience are retired pastors, which is really helpful because they bring that wealth of knowledge and experience. Okay, I think the last thing was about education. Part of what a response team does in a congregation is offer education on what sexual misconduct is, what kind of people perform acts of misconduct. And now we have the 5 key elements of congregational healing. One of the main ones is truth-telling, to let the congregation know what the action of misconduct was or is, not necessarily going into detail, but revealing that something has happened rather than having a lot of rumors going around.
Which will happen. You know that. You know that. If we don't say what has happened, we've left the community to conjure it up and make it in their head. And oftentimes, my experience has been that they created really significantly greater complexity.
They magnify it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting it's not difficult already, but they make it up to be a little more. Yeah. So this is an important thing. If you're talking about pulling together a response team, is everyone on the same page with this in your annual conference? Is everybody in agreement that it is important that the congregation be notified, be told that this is what has happened? I've received a complaint of a chargeable offense. It's of a sexual nature. It does not include children or youth or vulnerable adults. And your minister has been placed on leave, and Reverend John or Sue is going to be your interim pastor. That's a critical question to ask, because that's what's recommended, is that a response team can go into a congregation, and that has already been acknowledged or said. And it may be right at the same time on the same day, but that it has been revealed. Bonnie, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say it's important to remember that sometimes that doesn't happen.
Yes. Oh, I know.
Sometimes you're told, I had a call from the DS and she said, we need this and this is what's going on. And it wasn't 10 minutes later, she called me back and says, no, you can't tell anybody, not even the team,
right,
what I just told you.
Right.
So what I find works is if I can't tell them what's going on, I tell them. I'll tell you what I can tell you. There are some things I can't tell you because it's in a process of investigation, and it's still trying to be determined if the complaint is valid. And so that's not fair to the parties involved. Or I will say, if I can't tell you because I've been told I can't tell you, I'll tell you that too. That's the extent of my truth telling. And they work with that. They seem to be okay with, okay, so you've been told you've got to wait, you can't tell us anything, or you don't know anything. And I'll say, that's right. And they'll say, okay, that's all we needed to know. If I can, I'll always say it doesn't involve a member of the congregation, or it doesn't involve a child or a youth. And that usually stops a lot of it.
For the sake of time, let's run through this, and please write a question down if it just came up so we can answer.
Okay. The next step in healing of the congregation is allowing them to share their feelings and validate their feelings. One way would be to initially meet with like the PPR committee or key leaders and have them share how they're feeling about the situation, maybe provide some questions, and then set another meeting with the larger church community and lay down ground rules for the discussion, perhaps telling people only use I statements, and then have other people not be judgmental, but give everyone an opportunity to share how they feel. The other thing is for the response team to offer education as I just recently alluded to, letting them know what sexual misconduct means, what kind of person would perform acts of sexual misconduct, to educate them that these kinds of things really do happen. Spiritual reflection. Where is God in this? How can God help us to move toward healing? How can God restore our confidence in pastoral leadership and restore our faith in God? Because clearly people's faith is affected when these kinds of situations happen. And again, finding out from the congregation and from individuals what they need in the process of healing. One thing I typically ask congregations is what are you known for? What's the thing that this congregation does well? And then use that as a foundation to lead them toward the process of healing. The response team in action. Typically, the response team works under the direction of the bishop, and oftentimes, if the bishop is out of the country or away, under the bishop's direction, but through someone perhaps in the Office of Ministerial Relations. So the bishop is always at the head, but the bishop's designee is also a person that the response team can work under. Team members may be assigned to parties named in the complaint. Again, healing is necessary for all people, and we want to bring healing to all parties. Often, not just the complainant or the responder receive what we call advocates or care partners, but even family members and staff members receive someone to walk alongside them throughout the healing process. The response team may meet with the SPRC and or staff before they meet with the larger congregation as a means toward healing.
My experience, and I'm sure some of yours is too, is that too often we have neglected staff in this, and we put so much of our focus and emphasis on the congregation or the faith community, and the staffer who, especially if it's somebody on staff who has committed this offense, then and the staff are left to carry on the day in and day out. And I just throw that out and stress to you the importance of allowing the staff to have access to the team for the purposes of processing feelings and beginning to move through their own healing in this. So often it's not uncommon to hear at least one of the staff persons, if it's a higher level clergy, one of the other staff persons who's clergy say, "That was my mentor. That was my mentor. And I am lost. I don't know what to do. I cannot believe this." Number one, so it's just a crucially important piece.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Part of what the response team leaders do when they meet with the congregation is explain the process, process of moving toward healing, of accountability for the responder, what steps have already been taken, and what steps will be taken in the future to keep people informed. Again, small groups for debriefing, to first meet with the smaller leadership group and allow them to share their feelings verbally, and then when the larger church meets, to get into smaller groups and allow people to share their feelings.
And so what that might look like, what it might look like, is that you're all, the congregation has been notified, the response team is coming this afternoon, you're all welcome to be there. It is for you, it is for healing, and the leader of the team may share what the response team does, how it was developed, just a sort of a quick, brief history of why we even do this to begin with. And then maybe allowing some time for some conversation around that, and then perhaps splitting into smaller groups where a team person sits at the table with that smaller group. My experiences of having done that have just been unbelievable. What people want to be able to say and want to be able to have heard. Not only do they want to say it, but they want it to be heard. And they want to be affirmed in their anger or their sadness or whatever. And then maybe coming back together as a larger group and having a person from each of those tables share some of what was said at their table. And I've never been, and I'm just speaking from my experience, I've never been in a situation where it's been the exact same thing from every table. This table lifted up something that this group had never even considered. And so it's a validation of the importance of us doing the processing of working through this rather than just pretending it doesn't exist and being afraid of confronting it and not wanting to sit with people's pain. Because that's what you're being asked to do as a response team member, is to sit with individuals' pain. Two quick questions.
Yeah, just one process question, a newbie question. In that process, you're there with the congregation, and all of a sudden, in that context with persons around the table, additional additional incidents that might require a further complaint. Absolutely. Or in addition to the complaint, kind of what happens then?
Absolutely. Well, in a best case scenario, your DS would probably be there with you. And so you would have the opportunity to hear that out. And I've had that happen probably 3 or 4 times where they go, well, you know what, I remember, and then here it starts coming. Or he asked me to clean up his computer one time, and I did, and it was unbelievable. So yes, good chance it's going to happen. And I would say, allow the opportunity for that to be shared. Affirm to this person that you appreciate their willingness to step forward and share that, and then make arrangements to speak about that afterwards with the DS, where if another complaint needs to be filed, it can be filed. Absolutely. Yes?
This is so obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yes, please.
The response team is not there to solve the problem, or
Absolutely.
What your training and background is to explain the behavior. It's to hear the need of the congregation.
That's exactly right. It is about care. It is about healing. The team I was on was called The Healing. And I hope you've been thinking about, who are some of these people in your area? Who is the DS, or are you the DS that will go back and say to the cabinet, I want us to make a commitment to doing this work, and I want us to join together as a cabinet and reach out to our pastors for possible resources of people, or I want to contact the leader of UMCOR in our area and see who is doing work in that area that might want to be a part of this. Whatever, get creative in how you will recruit. It's important that we ask ourselves some questions, because our heart may be in the right place and we may have a pull for this ministry for whatever reason. And the reality is, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but this is extremely difficult. This can be very difficult work. This can be very emotionally taxing work. And it is a commitment. It is a commitment. And if your annual conference is not
if you're not being paid for this, you're being reimbursed for expenses or whatever, then it really is a true ministry that you're offering. So I have, asking yourself this question, or saying this sentence, I have knowledge of the unique ways individuals experience information. How aware are you on a day in and day out basis of how differently people process information? Because you're going to hear everything. You're going to hear people who say, I've never been happier in my life than seeing you walk in this door. And you're going to have the person who says in the same room, I will never support this church financially again. So what is your experience of being a part of that atmosphere? And how well does that trigger anything for you? And if so, paying attention to that. I am able to limit sharing of my own personal experiences, because when you go in to this response team, this is not about the trauma you've experienced. It's about the trauma they have experienced. And they didn't come to hear about your trauma. You came to hear about their trauma. You came to hear about their trauma. I've spent time in self-evaluation and can identify both my strengths and weaknesses. Now, that's a very vague statement, I understand. It's an invitation. It's a statement of invitation for you to know that if you're going to do this work, self-awareness and knowing where your gifts are and where they're not is an important piece of this ministry. I deal effectively with crisis. Just get quiet and think about how you do that. There are people we know that bring a sense of calmness to a place. Pay attention to those people. They may be some people that you'd like to have that aren't going to get rattled when 88-year-old says, I've had it with this church and I'm done, and this pastor stayed by my husband during cancer and chemo, and I cannot believe you're walking in here suggesting that he would do this. So who is that how well do you yourself? I honor and let me start over. I honor. Not I tolerate, I honor. And recognize we each pace ourselves differently in the process of healing. People want victims to hurry up and get over this. There's oftentimes an invitation for that. I had a situation recently where the victim said, my support person is pressuring me to forgive. And I'm not there yet. I want to be there, but I'm not there yet. And my support person is frustrated when I want to push for accountability and not just accept the first thing that's offered. Yeah. So I honor and recognize we each do this differently. It's a great book. We'll talk about this a little bit in the afternoon if any of you are coming to the afternoon session. If you're not familiar with this book, The Sunflower, it is it's an old book. It's an old book, but it's a great book to use with education pieces, with cabinet, in trainings that you offer, laity as well as clergy, and with your response team. It is the story of a Nazi soldier who asked for a prisoner in a concentration camp to come to his bedside because he wants to ask forgiveness. No, it just makes cold chills go over me. And Simon Wiesenthal, and the name of it is The Sunflower. So while imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp, he was taken one day from his work detail to the bedside of a dying Nazi soldier. Haunted by the crimes in which he had participated in, the soldier wanted to confess and obtain forgiveness from the Jewish man. Yeah. What would you have done in this place. And so there are about, from everyone from the Dalai Lama on, there are responses to that question in this book. What would you have done? And so it's just a beautiful book on an education piece to really process that question, because that premature forgiveness in these situations is a big no-no. And how often we've heard it. We're the church. I cannot believe we're dragging this out. We are the church. Where is our grace and where is our forgiveness? And that's a really not okay place.